Hello everyone. Let's start in a minute so that others can also join. Good afternoon everyone. So in the last session we had started discussing social issues and justice. So far we have covered the salient features of Indian society, and what we have done is we have been looking at these social institutions, social or sections of the society in the light of change. And the first force of change that we have discussed is globalization. Post that we had started discussing urbanization, and we had to discuss the effects of urbanization on Indian society. Now we have to remember two things here. The way we were looking at the effect of globalization on various sections of the society, various sections like women, elderly, children. Similarly, we were looking at the effects of globalization on various institutions of Indian society. In this same manner, we have to look at the effects of urbanization on these sections and institutions. When we start looking at these effects, you already know that these effects can be either positive or negative in nature. Now, when we think of urbanization, the first thing that comes to our mind is that these urban areas are overcrowded. These urban areas have issues ranging from pollution to traffic to urban management. These are the kind of issues that come to our mind. Now, what we have to do is when we look at effects of urbanization, we have to look at various effects, various dimensions like economic effects of urbanization, social effects of urbanization, environmental effects of urbanization, and so on. Now, we see that when it comes to environmental impacts of urbanization, this is something that we already know. This is something that we discuss in paper 3. But as far as your paper 1 is concerned, we have to look at impacts of urbanization on this dimension. So what we'll do is we'll go through all the other impacts briefly, and then we'll come to our subject matter, that is social impacts or social effects of urbanization. What kind of effect does urbanization have on Indian society? What kind of effect urbanization has on the institution of family? And then when we look at this effect, we have to think about what is positive and what is negative in this change. Because your syllabus says that we have to look at urbanization and issues related to urbanization. And so far, the questions that they have asked have actually been focused on the issues related to urbanization. And we'll come to it one by one. Aditya is asking whether do we discuss same-sex marriage and social issues. Yes, same-sex marriage is both important from your paper 1 and 2 perspective. When it comes to same-sex marriage, we'll take up the issue related to third gender, that is transgenders, and therein we will discuss sex marriage briefly. But again, we are not going to go into the constitutional dimension of same-sex marriage. We'll see that marriage as an institution, if you remember in your chapter 1 and 2, we had discussed how the institution of marriage is changing and what are the elements of continuity. So we are going to look at same-sex marriage as basically a change in the institution of marriage. And when we think about it, we have to see how it will change the functions of marriage, how it is going to change the features of marriage. And that is how we are going to look into same-sex marriage. And we'll take it up again towards the end of the discussion, or in the last chapter. My email address is hemant.tanwar@byju's.com. So if you have any doubts, you can write to me on this particular email address. Okay, so if you have any questions so far from the part of urbanization that we had discussed, please let me know. And we are going to continue, so you can keep posting your questions here. I'll be looking into those. Now, when we are talking about urbanization, we discussed migration as well, even though briefly, but we discussed migration. And we are saying that when it comes to the issue related to population growth in urban areas, there are two factors which are responsible, because ultimately these urban areas have high population density and high population. To address that issue of overpopulation, to address that issue of overburdened resources, what we have to do? We have to take care of migration and population growth in urban areas. So these are two factors basically contributing to growth of say your population in urban areas, and ultimately all the issues related to urbanization come from there, that we do not have sufficient resources to provide everyone, we do not have sufficient housing facilities, we do not have clean drinking water, etc. So we have to basically target this population growth. To control this population growth, either we can stop migration or we can stop population growth in urban areas. One is that aspect. Another aspect is whatever resources we have, whatever existing governance structure we have, we need to make changes to it so that it can accommodate the number of people who are there. So we see that traffic is a problem in urban areas. So if traffic is a problem, to address the issue of traffic, we have to strengthen our public transport system so that people can use that public transport system to commute for work, to commute for their education, to commute to meet someone. And this is how we are going to approach it. So what you have to do is, when we start looking at these effects of urbanization, first thing is that you break it down in dimensions: social, economic, environmental, and so on. And the other thing is, whenever you are looking at a particular issue, you have to think about a solution, a suggestion for the same, because every now and then you'll find newer kinds of suggestions. For instance, they're talking about putting up congestion tax in a few cities in India. So if you go to an area where there is a lot of traffic, where the population density is high, you would have to pay an extra amount. And then also briefly, very briefly, we are going to go into the ethical dimension of it, because that is something that is going to help you understand. If you put up price, or if you put up a price tag on everything, on every aspect, on every service, on every good, every commodity, it becomes a problem. So we are going to look into all those ideas. Okay, so there's a question which says, can a society get converted from from urban to rural areas? So we see that primarily we find that urbanization as a process is irreversible. If you remember, when we discussed urbanization as a process, we said it is a socio-economic process. We said it is a political process. At the same time, we said it is an irreversible process. Because if you have laid down infrastructure in a particular area, it is not constructive. It is not helpful to take it down. And if at all they do, you'll find redevelopment plans. So if the buildings turn old, if the buildings are in shackles, what they'll do is they'll take down that particular infrastructure and create new in its place. Hence, redevelopment of those areas. But yes, reverse migration is also a process that you can see. That take example, one of the example is your COVID lockdown. During COVID, you find that people were not having any economic opportunities. People did not have sufficient resources to survive in urban areas. So the only option they had was to migrate back to the rural areas. thereby reversing this process of urbanization. But you have to remember that it was a transient, it was a temporary process. It was not permanent, because when the lockdown opened, when the cities came up with newer job opportunities, or maybe holding on to the existing job opportunities, people started coming back to urban areas. So this process, if at all it happens, it is generally reversible. It is irreversible. That is urbanization. Also, you'll find that if at all there is a disaster, it can convert an area back to a primitive land. Take example of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Take example of your ancient Indus Valley civilization. Now, those were cities, those were very advanced at that point of time. But with time, the cities vanished. So yes, you'll find a few instances of this process of urbanization getting reversed, but it is not the rule. These are only exceptions. Okay, so I hope you remember this, understand this. Okay, so Ragini is asking that the idea of urbanization, when we were talking about the three kind of urban areas being highlighted by census. So I hope you got your answer, because the answer to this is census. It is according to your census 2011 definition that they had put up those three conditions of census towns: about population density, and then about the major occupation. Right? If you remember these three ideas about census towns. So these census towns are basically identified by your census. Yes, also you have asked a question saying why only the male population is counted. If you remember, I told you so that when it comes to the primary occupation or the condition about occupation, they talk about the male population, that at least 75% of the male population should be engaged in non-agricultural or primary activities. And yes, this sounds very regressive. This is very regressive. And that's why I was saying that when it comes to definitions, there are always going to be problems. So yes, hopefully in the next census, they're going to fix this, and they'll come up with an all-encompassing and rather an egalitarian definition of census towns. Another question about migration: is migration happening because of education? Is what type? I did not understand what is the question. So if you're talking about push and pull migration, that is something we're going to take up with population. And that happens to be our next chapter. We're going to discuss migration in a little detail. We are going to address this there, but it is pull type of migration, if that what your question was. Okay, so coming back to the subject matter, we are talking about effects of urbanization. So the first picture that comes to your mind when you think of urbanization is poverty, beggary, is traffic jams, is your slums, urban floods, issues related to pollution. These are the kind of issues that come to your mind. But again, you have to remember that when they ask questions, they ask very specific questions. For instance, they had asked a question particularly on IT hubs. And I'll tell you how to go about that question, how to discuss or how to attempt that question. But you have to remember the questions are going to be very specific in nature. And also, they haven't said that when it comes to issues related to urbanization, that you have to only take up social issues. Those issues can be of any kind. Okay, so Asif says, is there any relationship between sociology and social issues? Can this help us with sociology? Okay, so basically, if you think of Indian society and social change in Indian society, it is a part of sociology, because the entire study that we are taking up is basically derived from sociology. So this discussion that we are having is going to help you to a little extent when it comes to part 2 of your sociology syllabus, but I would not say that it is going to help you completely with paper 2. So if you take up sociology, it is definitely going to help you with the GS paper 1, but it is not vice versa, because when it comes to paper 2 in sociology, you have to read various theories. You have to read about the thinkers like M.N. Srinivas, G.S. Gurre. So that, yes, the institutions remain the same. Yes, you are going to follow the same kind of structure, but here it is watered down. Here it has been made easy to understand for you. That is where the difference is. Okay. So the first kind of challenge when it comes to urbanization that we're going to take up is your economic challenge. So when it comes to economic challenges of urbanization, you can go through this, do not worry about it. The first thing is that we do not have sufficient resources. The first problem starts with resources, and it extends to employment. When I say resources, I say we do not have sufficient resources to provide housing to everyone. We do not have sufficient resources to cater to the commutation needs of people. We do not have sufficient resources to provide electricity to everyone. So basically, the problem is of overburdened resources. We do not have sufficient resources. But also, you have to remember, when it comes to the distribution of resources, you'll find that urban areas have an upper hand. Even though they have limited geographical extent, but because they have industries, because they have service sector, you find that compared to rural areas, the distribution of resources is more in urban areas. Because if you think of rural areas, till today, you'll find that a 10, 12-hour power cut in a day is the norm. But when it comes to urban areas, even 1 hour of power cut in a month creates havoc, because your industries cannot survive with power cuts. So when it comes to overall resource distribution, your urban areas have an upper hand. And within urban areas, if you see that it is primarily your economic sector, it is primarily service sector and your industrial sector which get say more proportion of resources compared to your other areas in urban areas, in urban localities. Similarly, you'll find that your affluent households or your affluent areas, neighborhoods in urban areas will get more share of resources compared to your poorer areas. Do you think that sufficient amount of electricity, sufficient hours of electricity is provided in your underdeveloped areas and slums? And the answer is no. You find that these resources get distributed in a disproportionate manner to your affluent areas. Now, again, the answer to it is that yes, when it comes to service sector and industries, they need more share of electricity. They need more share of resources, because ultimately these are the sectors which are going to hold on to the entire population of that urban area. These are the industries who are going to provide job opportunities to people. These are the industries who are going to pay taxes. But ultimately, looking at this from a human value point of view, isn't it a basic right of everyone to get their due share out of the resources of your country, of your nation? So this is something for you to think about. Then second idea coming from resources is that of housing. So we do not have sufficient housing to be provided. So because of this inadequate housing, you find problem of slums, that we have a lot of slum areas, we have a lot of areas which are not developed, a lot of areas which are not authorized. You find that every now and then in bigger cities, a few areas are authorized. Why? Because people have been living there for years altogether, but they do not have the basic drainage facility. They do not have the basic, say, electricity connection. So ultimately, what government has to do is they have to develop these areas, they have to provide drainage facilities, they have to provide clean drinking water, etc. And they make them authorized areas. But this problem of slums is not just limited to housing. This problem of slums extends to health. This problem of slum extends to, say, availability of educational institutions. So this problem of slum is a big problem in itself. So when you look at slums, you'll find that a lot of socio-economic indicators fare poorly when it comes to your slum areas. And if you remember, I had shown you a question right at the beginning. It was about urbanization and how urbanization in India has not been able to tap its full potential. And this is what the full potential is, because the promise of urbanization was to provide economic opportunities to everyone. The promise of urbanization was to provide shelter to everyone, to provide resources to everyone. But it has not been able to fulfill that promise. And that is what you understand by urbanization not being able to realize full potential in India. Moving on, issue of overburdened resources, that is drinking water and electric supply. So if you do not get clean drinking water, you are more susceptible to falling sick. You'll be more vulnerable to various kind of diseases that are being spread. Then again, in these areas, in these poorer households, you'll find issues related to sanitation. So these kind of problems, when you think in terms of resources, it will fall in economic challenges. But when you think in terms of living conditions, it will fall in social challenges. So we're going to come to social challenges, and you're going to find the same thing. So when it comes to resources, it falls in economic challenges. But when it comes to the way of life or the standard of living, it falls in your social challenges, and we are going to come to that. So do not worry about that. It has been there has been an overlap between these, because ultimately your issues related to health will come from this problem of inadequate housing, this problem of unavailability of clean drinking water. So these are the problems which are going to basically affect your determinants related to health, determinants related to education. Because if you fall sick very often, you would not be able to attend school. If you come from a poor family, you are made to live in some areas, and you'll find that you would have to take up work rather than going to school. So these problems will become social problems, because ultimately at the heart of everything, the way we were saying, at the heart of globalization, you have profit. Similarly, at the heart of urbanization, you'll find it is also centered around economic activities, because ultimately it is for the sake of better economic opportunities that you travel to cities. Yes, you can say that for better quality of education, we also travel to cities. But what is your idea of education? Your idea of education is that if I get educated today, I'll get a better economic opportunity tomorrow. So all these ideas will generally revolve around economic activities. I'm not saying that it is only limited to economic activities, but generally it is around economic activities that everything is centered. Then if you have poverty, you can relate it to economic crime. And also, you remember this, please remember this, because we are not supposed to use words and phrases loosely when it comes to civil services, that it is economic crimes where you'll find an increase. You cannot say crime in general, because I'll ask you a question which will basically talk about the relationship between poverty and crime. Crime in general, because this crime can be about, say, various kind of violent activities. So what do you think? Is there a direct relationship between poverty and crime? And if yes, if you think so, how do you substantiate that? This is a question for you. What is the relationship between poverty and crime? Please substantiate. Can someone suggest? Please try to answer this question. Meanwhile, Jayant has a question that why don't we develop tier 2 and 3 cities the way we develop our metro cities? Also, I'll come to this, Jayant, when we think about suggestions to address these challenges related to urbanization. Okay, so one person, oh, okay, so Aditya says that empty mind causes violent thinking. Okay, anyone else who can bring about a relationship between poverty and crime, and how do you substantiate that? Aditya, if you say this, how do you substantiate the statement that you have made? Ragini is saying a fundamental right to life and property. I could not, I am not able to understand. Can you please elaborate? How about others? You're also there in the class. Please try to take part in this discussion. As discussed on the very first day, this is a subject, or sociology in general talks about society, and you already have an understanding of society. So it is not very difficult to come up with answers to whatever basic questions I ask. I do not ask very complicated questions for that matter. Okay, so Pooja relates hunger can ultimately lead to violence or crime. So basically, your idea is that to make up for the economic gaps, to take care of their immediate basic necessities, people can take up to crime. But also, I have asked you that how do you substantiate this? Now you remember this thing, that yes, you can find an upsurge in economic crimes in poorer areas, in poorer neighborhoods. But when it comes to a direct relationship between poverty and crime, We do not find anything. One is that we have a lack of research on this. Whatever, say, a couple of research works are there coming from different societies, not Indian society, you'll find that yes, poverty and crime can be related when it comes to economic crimes, but there is no direct relationship between poverty and other kind of violent crimes or heinous crimes. And also, just think about this. Just think about this. You would have gone through your national multidimensional poverty index. Like recently, it was in news, and India has fared very well when it comes to national multidimensional poverty index. And also, if you look at poverty, poverty has been on a decline. When you think of poverty over the years, poverty has been on a decline. But what about your crime rates? What about those? Don't you see that the crime rates have been increasing? The number of criminal activities are increasing, even though poverty is on a decline. So if we take up society as a whole, Indian society as a whole, or any society as a whole, we see that the governments are putting in efforts. The civil society organizations are putting in efforts to control this problem of poverty, to alleviate poverty. But at the same time, you find that yes, poverty is declining, but crime rates are on a rise. So if you look at this general relationship between poverty and crime rates, you would find that they are inversely proportional. But when you come to specific parts, when you come to say poorer neighborhoods, you'll find that there can be an upsurge in economic kind of activities, in economic crimes, like chain pulling. In railways, also in many areas, you'll find that when it comes to poorer households, generally you'll find that the the policeman or the administration would say that you better be careful at night, because there are a lot of incidents of chain snatching, there are a lot of incidents of people robbing others, of mugging, etc. So yes, economic crimes can be related directly to poverty. And also you find that in general there is a lack of resources, there is an unequal distribution of resources, because that is the point that everyone was trying to highlight, that there is an unequal distribution of resources. There are a few who are having parties on a yacht, and then there are others in cities who are barely able to take care of their dietary requirements, who are barely able to make 2 square meals a day. So because of this economic disparity, because of this gap, these things happen. But this is no answer, or this is no reason to justify any kind of criminal activity. You have to remember that, because the way you have written, it sounds like, say, maybe we're trying to say legitimize crime by talking about this gap. If at all you say, because yes, we do think that it is because of this gap that crimes happen, but it is not primarily because of gap, because there can be say a gap in incomes of various households, but it is primarily because people are not able to fulfill their basic requirements. It is because people are not able to put food on their plates, that they have to take up to stealing food from elsewhere. So again, try writing in such a manner that you do not sound like justifying any kind of crime. Okay, so let me just quickly go through your comments that you have written so far. Poverty leads to hopelessness, lack of confidence, etc. Yes. So Vishal is saying that people are forced to commit crime to fill their stomachs due to unemployment. Abuse of poor people by rich makes them more violent. But also you have to remember that when it comes to other kind of economic crimes, say chain snatching, etc., generally the poorest of the poor do not take up to those kind of activities. If you look at, say, your crime records, and I'm not saying this because I'm no one to say make this statement, but with my limited understanding, with me going through a limited data, because ultimately you not find any research in there, because who cares about the poor, right? Who would take up a research on poor people? So but you'll find that when it comes to these kind of economic crimes of, say, mugging someone online, phishing, etc., these are not being taken up by poorest of the poor, and poorest of the poor are the ones who are basically lagging behind when it comes to their basic dietary requirements, basic nutritional requirements. Forget about education, forget about health, but to put food on the plate is a task. But they do not take up to economic crimes or any other kinds of crime to fulfill those requirements. Okay, moving on. I'm just giving you this ethical dimension so that when you write, you are being careful with your words. Whatever you write, you should have some substance in it. You should be able to substantiate that statement. That is what my idea is. That's why we are, say, digressing a bit in ethics every now and then. And we cannot detach society from ethics, because our value system is something that keeps the society intact. If you remember, we were discussing this value system in your chapter 1. So we have to at times go into the values behind whatever we do. Okay, moving on. Then the problem of unplanned development. So when it comes to economic challenges, you'll find that the budgetary allocation, the outlay for developing, for creating more opportunities, etc., is not much. Yes, we are talking about creating smart cities, but again, it is limited to a few cities. Also, you'll find that these urban local bodies do not have a lot of discretion when it comes to how do they want to spend that money. It ultimately flows from the top. So because of this top to bottom approach, we are not able to cater to specific needs, specific requirements of urban areas. And then you'll find that there is no cooperation whatsoever between various departments. I'll give you an example from my own city. In my city, the urban local body, the municipal corporation, laid down the lines for water, drinking water, etc. And you know how the government works, these government contracts go. They took close to 8-9 months. And all the roads were in a bad situation, in a bad state for close to 8-9 months. And one fine day, they finalized everything. They created the roads, they put on the tar, etc. And everything was fine. But for how long? It was not even a week before they started working on the Amrut plan and started laying down the drainage infrastructure again. So they had to dig up the same roads that they had created a week ago, which shows a lack of coordination between various departments of the government, a lack of coordination between your center and state governments. And also, the urban local bodies do not have a lot of autonomy, even though this point falls in the political challenges. But I'm just telling you here because it follows from unplanned development. Also, when it comes to unplanned development, you'll find that in your metro cities particularly, there'll be areas which will be densely populated. There'll be areas where you'll have n number of corporates, and also it'll be a residential area. It'll become a total commercial area. Now you see that in these commercial areas where you have economic opportunities, the population density is going to be high. So what happens is the development of those areas is very haphazard. You look at this situation in Delhi, you look at this situation in Bangalore, in Chennai. So you'll find those neighborhoods where the population density is very high. And then there'll be areas, pure residential areas, where the population density is going to be low. So this unplanned development, that you should have a plan where to set up corporates. It should not be haphazard. If you want to set up industries, they better be outside the cities, on the periphery of the cities, so that if there is good public transport, people can travel from the city to those areas, so that there is no problem of commutation, no problem of traffic. Then you provide residential areas around these service sector units and your industrial units, because otherwise the problem of traffic jam will remain, because people would have to travel from the place they stay to the place of their work. And you find that in these urban areas, not a lot of people own their houses. A lot of people are there, they think of working for say 5-7 years or 10 years or maybe 2 years, and leaving for their leaving for a place around their hometown. So most people can easily afford to switch their residence from one place to another because they do not own the place. And if you provide the opportunities to stay, to live a decent life around these areas where you set up the industries and service sectors, it is going to solve a lot of problem. So that a person living in this part of the city do not have to travel all the way to this part of the city for work. This is the place of residence, this is the place of work. If say the residence is somewhere around, the commute will be a lot less. So this can basically fix the problem of traffic jams in the cities. So this is just an idea. So you have to keep coming up with newer ideas. And this is something that you're going to find in your newspapers. Moving on, excessive population pressure on public resources. So one idea is your basic resources to maintain a decent standard of living, like clean drinking water, electricity, housing, etc. Then it comes to your public infrastructure. Look at your buses in metro cities. No matter what time of the day it is, they are always overcrowded. There are always people ready to fall out of the gates, of the windows. So the public transport system has to be better. The way I was giving you an example, and I believe I was giving you an example of your dedicated bus corridors in Jaipur. The dedicated bus corridors that they had planned to start in Delhi back in 2015-16 because of the traffic and pollution problem. But the problem remains that implementation is not proper. We cannot enforce these ideas. Then your metro transit systems or your rapid transit systems that are being laid across cities in India, be it Bangalore, Chennai, Jaipur, Delhi, etc., Bombay, you find it is a more efficient way. So look at the population density in Delhi, and you see that your metro is doing a good job in controlling the traffic on roads. But also, if you incentivize public transport, so one way is to incentivize public transport. One way is to incentivize this, and the other way is to penalize personal modes of transport. There are two ways, basically. So to incentivize people to take a public transport, you make it cheaper, you make it more convenient, you increase the frequency of your buses, your trains, etc. Similarly, if you want to penalize someone for taking up their private cars, there can be various ways, like your congestion tax, like increasing the taxes in general, having a component of environment cess, etc., on a purchase of a particular vehicle. Then similarly, you find that another way of penalizing is uh, when it comes to NCR, you can register a diesel vehicle only for 10 years. Post that, either you have to send it to get it scrapped or sell it in a different city. So that also puts off people from buying these kind of vehicles. Similarly, if you incentivize public transport, if you incentivize electric transport, it is going to go a long way in helping you with traffic management and controlling pollution. But also you have to remember another thing, and maybe this is something that you would have already read in paper 3, that when it comes to your electric vehicles, so there are two ideas. So one is your basic, say your diesel vehicles are being scrapped after 10 years. In place of it, they're trying to replace it with your electric vehicles. But with research, you find that these electric vehicles, to produce them and to put them on road, to put them in working condition and for them to work, they have a lot more carbon footprint compared to what this diesel vehicle, if extended for another 5 years, would have. So if you extend the same diesel vehicle for 5 more years, it would pollute a lot less compared to a newly created electric vehicle, because a lot goes into manufacturing these electric vehicles. Then what about the disposal of your batteries, which also is a problem? So rather than putting a blanket, rather than say disposing of all the diesel vehicles, we have to be careful. We have to be we have to standardize our approach. There has to be a fine balance between what we are trying to do. So with research, you find this thing, and this is something that you can mention, and I believe this is something that you would have already read in paper 3 when it comes to environment and ecology, because we have a newfound push towards electric vehicles. So government is trying to subsidize. The government is helping your private players to lay down this electric infrastructure or these charging points, etc., across cities, across highways. But ultimately, you find that if you extend the same diesel vehicle for another 5 years, it is going to pollute our environment a lot less compared to a newly manufactured electric vehicle that is being put on the road. So all these ideas have to be taken in mind. And again, when it comes to this part, when it comes to society, you always have ideas coming up from your current affairs, and particularly urbanization, because every city is facing these kind of challenges. No matter how better it has been planned, ultimately it reaches a stage where it becomes overburdened. Because in India we said that there is the urbanization is not evenly distributed. So you have a few metro cities who have all the opportunities, who have a high population density. Then you have smaller cities, tier 2 and 3 cities, where you do not have sufficient number of opportunities. So if you try to develop your rural areas, if you try to develop your other urban areas, this problem of overburdening of resources in urban areas and over urbanization in case of India can be tackled. So going back to the point, we were saying that one way is to control the population growth, and the other way is to stop this migration from happening, because ultimately this migration is at the heart of all these economic challenges. Because of this excessive migration from rural to urban areas, people are not able to find jobs, people are not able to get a decent housing facility, etc. So if you stop this migration, you can do that. But stopping this migration does not mean that these cities close their doors to people coming from other areas. But stopping this migration means that develop other areas so that people find opportunities in their area itself. Because given a choice, people would want to stay in their hometown. Because why do you move out of your hometown? Because you do not have economic opportunities there, you do not have opportunities to grow there, you do not have opportunities for better education there. So if we fix these problems, people would not want to move out of their areas. Because ultimately the society, there is a great communal bond. You have your family there, you have a lot of your friends there, people know you, etc. Considering all these factors, people would want to stay in their own areas. Okay, moving on from economic challenges to environmental challenges, you find that the primary challenge is overburdening of resources, that the resources are depleting at a very fast rate, and these cities generate a lot of carbon footprint. Just look at your service sector, it runs 24/7. So all your air conditioning, all your electricity, all your electrical equipments are are being turned on, or stay turned on throughout the day and night, 365 days in a year. Similarly, your industries generate a lot of waste, which is being disposed of into our rivers and other water bodies. These industries generate a lot of air pollution. Then your air pollution is being impacted by your vehicular traffic or your vehicular pollution, which also becomes one of the major components in deteriorating our air quality index in cities. So there are a lot of environmental challenges. So one is disposal of waste, and you find there are simple solutions to these. So if there is a huge environmental or vehicular pollution, you control the amount of pollution that is being generated by these big vehicles. So in every city, they keep coming up with newer ideas regarding the same. The even odd rule, the congestion tax, incentivizing public transport. What is it going to do? It is going to help you in managing the traffic. It is going to help you in managing the levels of pollution in the city. So I'll give you an example, a very recent example. Because of the G20 meet, Delhi was under a semi kind of lockdown for 3 days. In Delhi, you find that generally the pollution levels or the AQI is more than 200, is at least 200 on a regular day. And during winters now, when the particles will become more dense, the air masses are going to push the pollution down. It'll increase to 500 and plus in winters. But generally, it is more than 200. Can someone suggest, or can someone predict what AQI would Delhi have on the third day, of this lockdown? Has anyone any idea? Because it was mentioned in the newspapers on the very first page. So it was 45. in a few areas and less than 100 in each and every area. So the air became cleaner. Why? Because there was no traffic, no vehicular traffic or on the roads. Even the industries had to a certain extent, had to shut themselves down. The service sector offices were non-functional for 3 days. So on the third day, the air quality became very good. The air quality fell or was actually below 50. The AQI was below 50. So don't you think that a similar kind of lockdown, maybe once in a week or two, would help? What do you think? That will help us make our air quality better. But again, there'll be challenges. One idea is that this air quality index was transient, was temporary, and on the very next day, it reached its existing levels of more than 200. Second thing is, if we shut down these economic activities and everything, what happens to the poor? What happens to the daily wage laborers? What happens to the overall economic growth of that particular city and the country at large? So these kind of solutions are generally, so when you think of any kind of suggestion, you have to weigh, because any kind of change will bring about both positive and negative impacts. So you always have to weigh, you always have to use that utilitarian approach, that what consequences it might have. So if it has more positives, then yes, it is a go ahead. But if it has more negatives, then you have to drop the idea. We'll come to this, Aditya. So, Aditya is saying, what about Gandhiji's idea? So, the idea was one idea, if you already remember, that we had discussed with globalization. So, accept positives from the global culture, but retain the positives of your own culture. Do not lose your culture. Do not completely submit to a foreign culture and forget your own. You have to strike the right balance. Similarly, when it comes to urbanization, his ideas can be extended to the idea that you develop your rural areas, because he was, say, very vocal about generating self-employment. He was very vocal about keeping our cottage industry intact, because what happens is these industries, these smaller industries, employ a lot of unskilled labor, and if they can absorb the unskilled labor in those areas, it is going to stop the migration. And that's what his idea was. So this is basically a suggestion. So again, Jayant is suggesting that let's have an say early approach to this. So another thing, the thing with this is that it'll have economic consequences, and particularly on the poorest of the poor. Either government has to come up with a subsidy for these days of lockdowns, which would not be practically possible, because once you open this, it is like a Pandora's box. You do not know what comes to your way, right? So we have to be very careful about making these kind of suggestions. So it was an exception which was being made. So I was just telling you the extent of vehicular pollution, the extent of pollution that is being generated by our industries and our service sector as well. It is not just that your industries generate pollution. Your service sectors contribute equally, particularly to global warming, particularly to ozone depletion. Right. So yes, we have to have sustainable practices. For instance, if you have ever been to Bombay Airport or Mumbai International Airport, you'll find that they are trying to reduce their carbon footprint. So they have solar lighting all over. So they are using renewable form of energy. So rather than say having your basic air conditioned infrastructure, they have it all open. It is very green. They have huge fans inside the airport. And if anyone ever has visited that airport, so we have to bring in more and more sustainable practices. And see, the one idea is, yes, that the government can do a lot in regulating and everything, but also we as individuals have to do our bit. Yes, it you can think that in a population of 140 crores, how would it matter? But yes, If out of those 140 crores, even if 10% of the people become say uh, become very aware about the consequences of their basic activities, it is going to reduce a lot of our pollution woes, because you will then start generating less and less waste. You would know that you would not have to use poly bags. If you start turning off the fan and lights and your air conditioner every time you move out, this is also going to say uh, help you a lot, or help the society as a whole a lot. Because now, yes, we do turn off the say various electrical equipments while going out, but the reason primarily is what? The reason primarily is electricity bill. The reason is not conserving the environment. And as and when we get an opportunity, so if we are say leaving our cabins inside our office, we do not care about turning off the electricity. We do not ask the person in charge or the person responsible to maybe turn off that particular unit, right? So it is primarily because of the electricity bill. It is primarily because of the immediate consequence that we turn it off. So it has a lot to do with our value system. And again, putting in the Gandhian idea there, it has to start from the individual. So the individuals who have brought about far-reaching changes in the society, they started with themselves, right? And you have already mentioned the examples of various such individuals, of various such personalities who did a lot by having a control, by keeping their own value system in check. So yes, there can be a lot of say ideas about the negatives of the Gandhian idea, the political ideas, etc. But you see what kind of changes he brought about in the society. And if at all people had retained that value system, we would not have been facing a lot of problems that we have today. And in paper one, you find that I'm digressing a bit just to give you an idea. In paper one, there is this question this year which talks about the ideas of nationalism of Rabindranath Tagore and Gandhi. Tagore and Gandhi, they have asked you to compare the ideas about nationalism between Gandhi and Tagore. So generally, it is not being taught in general studies, but the idea is you should have the idea about these personalities because they have mentioned it in the paper. So you have to be aware about various kind of people, individuals who contributed a lot. So yes, it was a difficult question considering people do not have a background in say PSIR, people do not have a background in history. So for a regular student, it was a tough question. And the idea of nationalism, I'm just again digressing a bit just to give you an idea that how you have to go about these things. You find that the Gandhian movement was more about bringing people together against a foreign enemy, right? So Gandhi was the one who was able to, in the era of Russian Revolution, in the era of Bolshevik Revolution, Gandhi was the one who brought your industrialists, your peasants, your workers, your zamindars together against a foreign ruler called Britishers. This was the Gandhian idea that if we come together, if we get united, we can oust this player. We can take over this foreign power. That's what the Gandhian idea was. But Tagore was of the view that this unity that you have created of people coming from various sections, etc., this unity is phony. This unity is not going to last. This unity is mechanical. Because the idea was, the Tagore's idea was, once, because yes, you can get them united and you can oust the Britishers. You can send the Britishers out of this country. You can dent the British rule. But once the Britishers are gone, this unity that you had created was on the basis of that foreign enemy. And once that foreign enemy is gone, how are you going to hold this society together? Because this solidarity, because this unitedness was mechanical. It was against that enemy. Once that enemy is gone, these people will start fighting amongst each other on the basis of caste. These people will start fighting amongst each other on the basis of religion. And don't you think this is what has happened in the Indian society? Yes, we were able to get independence, we were able to oust the Britishers, but ultimately, this unity has fallen apart to a great extent. And that's why you find an increasing number of violent conflicts in our society on the basis of race, on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of religion, on the basis of caste. And that was the idea of Tagore. Okay, so coming back to our context, sorry for digressing a bit, just to give you an idea that everything is connected, right? So we are connecting urbanization and the ideas behind urbanization to Gandhi, to somewhere, to the ideas that were there in modern history, right? So Gandhian idea was to say develop all the areas, to keep these cottage industries, these self-employed people intact, so that they generate economic opportunities for people living in their own areas, so that we retain our culture, so that we retain our diversity, we retain our economic prosperity, or maybe go back to the days of economic prosperity that India had seen. But what happened is our developmental plans had a limited scope. Our developmental plans were not far-sighted. And we see that we have these newer problems coming up in our Indian society. Coming back to it, we can think of pollution-free transport, and also you have to come up with suggestions. So, for instance, the Delhi government has introduced your 100% electric vehicles, electric buses to take people from one place to another, which is a pollution-free transport. To fix the problem of waste disposal, one idea is to reduce the waste. The other idea is to recycle, that you already know. And also on the level of government, you'll find that now that your single-use plastics have been banned, they are trying to have say more and more hold over this. But we find that it is because of us, we as people, the demand is not dying down. Even the shopkeepers, once they are challaned, maybe for a day or two or maximum a week, they would not use plastic bags. But because of the demands from people, because people will walk empty-handed to the grocery store and expect the shopkeeper to provide them with a baggage. And the cheapest form of baggage that is available is plastic bags. And ultimately, because of this demand from public, you find that the single-use plastic ban has not been very productive. They are still in use, they're still existing in the system, and we already know that it is very hard to dispose. So if one person, maybe within a society complex, if one person, two people start taking their own baggage, because at that point of time there'll be other people who are there in the grocery store, and if the shopkeeper once at all, if they mention that look at these people, they bring their own baggage to carry their goods, that is going to trigger a change, a psychological change in people. And you see that it is not it is not a very ideal situation. You look at the idea of cleanliness, because the current government, for that matter, yes, you can criticize them on various accounts, everything is fine, but the idea about generating awareness about yoga, generating awareness about physical and mental health, generating awareness about cleanliness and the consequences of not keeping your surroundings clean, it has triggered a mass form of movement, and which has popularized these ideas, which is a good way. So why always wait for the government to bring about changes if we can do it on our own? Okay, coming back, so we can see economic challenges, environmental challenges. Then there is this phenomenon of urban heat island that you know, which is also a consequence of urbanization. And I hope you know this idea from your environment lectures, from your paper 3 lectures. You find that these urban areas, because they have industries, because they have more density of people, because they have, say, densely packed areas or housing facilities, because they have more electrical equipments, because they have, say, more service sector units, the temperatures in those areas are higher compared to their surrounding areas, which create this heat island effect. So once you say, if you take your bike, particularly in the evenings, you'll find that in the urban areas it'll be, because of the crowd, because of the pollution, vehicular pollution, etc., it is warmer. Once you move to the outskirts of the cities, you you experience at least 2 to 3 degrees Celsius temperature drop when it comes to surrounding areas. That means because of our man-made activities, because of anthropological activities, the temperatures of these urban areas are higher compared to the surrounding areas, which create this urban heat island effect. Okay. Moving on to your political challenges, we were saying, okay, so Aditya is saying, going back to pollution, Aditya is saying that the electric vehicles are very costly in India. Also, see, there are lacunas when it comes to electric vehicles, one of which I have already highlighted, that the carbon footprint that is being generated by the manufacturing of these electric vehicles is far more than extending the life of a diesel vehicle for say 5-10 years. This has been established by research, and there have been multiple researches on the same that you can find generally in the newspaper. Also, you do not have sufficient electric vehicle infrastructure. How do you charge it, etc.? Then the problem related to disposal of the battery, then the problem related to cost. But ultimately, you see that whenever a new technology is introduced, it will obviously be expensive. Then with more advancement, with more proliferation of the same technology, with newer competitors coming up in the market, you'll find the cost ultimately is going to go down. But yes, there are few, say, commodities in which the prices do not go down because of multiple factors. For instance, because of that import from China ban, the say price of your various hard drives, etc., was before that say ban, it was somewhere around 1500, 2000. But after the ban, it became close to 3000. But even though at a later stage the ban was removed and you could have imported goods from China, the prices did not come down. The price levels remained the same. Similarly, look at your smartphones. They're not getting cheaper. Yes, they have more features in the same price bracket compared to say what was there 5 years before, but the prices have not gone down. So it might happen that the prices of these electric vehicles do not go down, but ultimately the society, the economy gets used to it. Just look at the average smartphone sale today. If you look at your own smartphone, you'll find that it is very expensive. It is very expensive, but you feel that no, it is nothing. It is a basic phone. Look at people buying cell phones worth 50, 40,000, 80,000 rupees. And your mere 10,000, 5,000 rupee phone would look like something very cheap. But ultimately, you see that it packs a lot more features. The 10,000 rupee phone is more than sufficient to take care of all your needs. But yes, when it comes to your wants, you would need a more, say, complex machine for that matter. And the society has normalized this. We have normalized this. Otherwise, the cell phone ranges started from 2,000, 1,500 rupees. But now 10,000 is the new normal. Even if you look at people coming from poorer households, they are also able to afford a phone, a cell phone, smartphone worth rupees 8,000, 10,000 easily. That has become the norm. Okay, so yes, there are problems, issues associated with these electric vehicles, but ultimately we have to understand that going forward, this is going to be the future. This is the technology that we are going to need in the future. Coming to political challenges, the first thing we were saying was that the cities have not been planned properly. There is issue related to urban planning. Then we find that the same point was there when it came to economic challenges, that these urban local bodies do not have a lot of autonomy in taking these decisions. So we have basically a top down approach, whereas we should be having a bottom up approach. So the city administration knows the best what is the problem in the city, and they should be the ones who have to take this decision, that this is something that we have to keep on priority. Our priority is to say widen the roads. For instance, our priority is to lay down public infrastructure or public transportation system. They should be the ones who have to take the decision. But also we find that if there is an increased autonomy, if there is increased discretion with these bodies, it ultimately leads to corruption. It ultimately leads to corrupt practices, which also becomes a problem. But ultimately, there has to be a bottom-up approach, that they have to suggest that these are the problems in our city which need to be fixed, and these are not on the basis of the area that I'm coming from. Because generally, what do you find? Your politicians, even your corporators, councillors, municipal corporators, you'll find that when it comes to the entire city, the roads are in a bad state. But once you reach their own area, you'll find that they lay down a very fine infrastructure, public infrastructure in their own areas, right? So this is a problem. So there has to be transparency, the accountability has to be fixed. It should not happen that they create a road, they construct a road, and in a matter of days, in a matter of weeks, you find huge potholes. It should not happen. That means there was a compromise with the quality. There was a compromise when it comes to the review of that particular road. And ultimately, if we leave it just to the government, nothing's going to happen. We as members of the civil society, we as members of this larger community, we also have to take a step, right? Because you are the ones who are paying taxes. Yes, right now you're a student and you might not be paying a direct tax, but you are paying indirect taxes, which are basically the largest component when it comes to our taxation structure. So if you are paying taxes, you have to hold them accountable. You have to question them. And it should not be on the basis of your personal ulterior motives. They have to be about the larger community. There has to be long-term approach. Because we do complain about and we crib about bad condition of our roads, bad condition of our drainage system. Because if it rains for 15 minutes, the entire city is blocked. The entire city will find traffic jams because of water logging. But how many of us have taken out time to maybe file or lodge an online complaint about the same? How often do we practice our rights? How often do we take care of our responsibilities? You do have right to information. Go check it, fill the form. It is not very expensive. And find out who was the contractor, who was the one who reviewed it, what was the process that was being followed. But we do not care about it. So because also, why am I mentioning this? That in every point, you have to talk about the role of civil society. When it comes to poverty alleviation, the government is counting on civil society. The government is asking the banks to open up self-help groups. But why it has to come from the government at all the times? We as society can also contribute to the society that we live in. Okay, and it is going to help you with your approach when it comes to answering your questions in interview. So we do not take up the preparation in watertight compartments. And this is something that I'm particularly mentioning to the ones not taking part in the discussion. Because ultimately, if you do not have enough confidence to type your answers here, where you have a certain sense of anonymity, where no one knows you, how would you answer questions sitting in front of a very well placed panel? People who have years and years of experience in the same field. How are you going to put up your views there? So this is something that you have to start right from the beginning, because it is not as simple that you, if you make it to the interview, that you're done, you're cleared. You have people who have given 3-4 interviews, right? Why? Because they are not able to work on their personality, and your work on personality starts the day when you start your preparation. It should start on that very day. Okay, coming back, lack of accountability and transparency, and I hope the idea is clear. So you can use examples. Whatever examples you find in the newspaper, just keep mentioning that one. So I have given personal examples, you can use those, but also if there are newer examples about falling off a bridge, for instance, about urban flooding, etc., use those examples, because it should show that yes, you are updated, you know how to connect your static part to your dynamic part. Lack of financial and administrative autonomy, then you find there is a lack of cooperation between various departments of the government and various levels of the government. Various departments, in the sense that if the drainage department, if the engineers working in the drainage department, if they're aware that yes, even the department who have to provide drinking water, they are also planning to lay down their infrastructure, and we can do it at the same time, so that we do not have to dig up the roads on 2 occasions. At once it can be done, so that we save resources in terms of human resource and both economic resources. So if there is better coordination, I'm just writing this down, between various departments, and levels of government. Levels, I've already given you an example about urban local body, state government, and your central government. Then department, you can think about this. So there has to be coordination. Because of this lack of coordination, we go on misusing resources. We go on creating public inconvenience. Because if we keep digging up roads every third day, how are people supposed to commute? How are people supposed to maintain a decent lifestyle? Improper urban planning, already done. Lack of proper urban development policy. So uh, the idea about policies is, now this idea about policy can be extended to other areas as well. So for instance, let's take up example of urban development. So if there is urban development policies, that this is the framework in which you have to lay down public infrastructure. This is the area which should be earmarked for service sector. This should be the area earmarked for industries, etc. This is how the residential areas have to be. There should be well-defined policies about all the aspects of urbanization. Because if newer residential areas keep coming up with high-rise buildings, you'll find that they would not be able to provide basic clean drinking water to all the people, because now we do not have an option, right? Previously, you find that our establishments were horizontal, right? Horizontal, one house, second house on a horizontal plane. Now the establishments are more vertical in nature, horizontal to vertical, that you'll find high-rise buildings, 25 floors, 10 floors, 8 floors, etc. And we do not have any other option. If you want to make a lot of people live in the same area, you cannot go for horizontal planning. You have to go for vertical planning. Yes, we can understand the importance, the significance of vertical planning. But if it is unplanned, if it is haphazard, you'll find that in this vertical establishment, how do you maintain the drainage system? It can also lead to problems related to disaster. If an area is disaster prone, you find that the base is not going to hold on to such kind of weight. And on this account, you find that in your Delhi and NCR region, now they're not letting individual plots develop beyond, say, 3 floors, or there's a particular height, 45 feet. So you not have to remember the number, but now they're doing it. But if there is a well-defined policy right from the beginning for each and every city, it'll fast track the process, that they already know that these are the conditions that they have to fulfill. And this similar kind of having a proper policy can be extended to our internal security protocols, that if there is a well-defined, say, doctrine, that this is the way in which we have to proceed in a case of emergency, this is going to go a long way, because our response time will be less. It'll be more planned. It'll be more efficiently planned. So for instance, you'll find that in your localities, in your societies, in your offices, there'll be say, fire drill every now and then. Why? So that people are already used to it. People already know about this. People understand the protocol, so that the response time in case of an emergency would be less, and they can minimize any kind of casualties. So similar way, there has to be a proper urban development policy. So the way they have planned Chandigarh, for example, the Union Territory and the joint capital of Haryana and Punjab, that is Chandigarh, you find that they have planned it so well. The industrial areas and the service sectors are there on the outside. You have residential areas in between. On the roads, you have separate lanes for your pedestrians, the ones who have bicycles, the ones who have motorcycles, etc. So they have planned everything beforehand. Similarly, if you look at your New Okla Industrial Development Authority, that is Noida, the newer areas of Noida, they have planned it so well that tomorrow, if the population increases even by 3 times, the infrastructure is going to sustain it. So all these ideas come into the domain of planning, which is basically a political challenge. Because what they do is, they'll create a 2-lane, say, flyover, without considering the fact, without going into interpolations, that tomorrow, 15 years or 10 years down the line, will have the population is going to double, because so and so industries are going to set up, so and so educational institutions are coming up. And if we plan it beforehand, because these flyovers, these road infrastructure should last for years, but then what happens? that it becomes inefficient, it becomes overburdened, and they scrap it and create a new one. But that takes a lot of resources, that takes a lot of time. So if they plan all these things beforehand, it is going to help them. So there has to be a fixed, proper policy for urban development. Then your corruption. And this is something I need not expand on. This is something that we know. And also, yesterday we were having a discussion, for that matter, that just a little digression, just to give you an ethical perspective, because how corruption can get institutionalized. So to fast track any kind of process, back in the 90s, you had to pay something under the table. You had to make your file heavier, right, to get things done. And that was considered to be illegal. That was considered to be a part of corruption. But today, and this is just a little fodder for your thought, right? This is something that you have to think about, that how corruption can get institutionalized without you being aware of the same. But now, to fast track any kind of process, even in government offices, you can pay an extra amount. So the ones who were ready to pay an extra amount to get their passport ready within a week can still do the same. But now this idea of putting value on each and every service, on each and every commodity, has become institutionalized. So yes, previously there was a premium that had to be paid, but it was outside the ambit of the basic structure. But now that premium has been institutionalized, and you have these fast track ways to get things done, even in your government facilities. So this is something that you have to think about, that can we and should we put a price tag on each and everything that is there in the society? So are we transitioning from a market economy to a market society? Just something for you to think about, so that it gives you an ethical perspective. So a few might say that yes, the ones uh, who have an urgency should be able to use this kind of facility, because there can be people who have to leave for another country within 15 days, so they have to get their passport ready, they have to get their visa done, so on and so forth. Yes, it is going to help them, but ultimately the idea of paying a premium, the idea of putting a price tag on getting this process fast track has been institutionalized. I hope you get the idea. Just think about it. Okay, then the attitude of your government and your civil servants in implementation of projects. And also, if I make the statement that any policy, for that matter, is as good as its implementation, would it be right? Would it be something that can be substantiated? That any policy, no matter how well it has been designed, is only as good as its implementation. This is also something you need to think about. This idea is going to be taken up with your papers on health and education, with your topics on health and education. Do not worry about it. But this is something that you have to keep in mind, that if the implementation is poor, ultimately it is not going to yield any benefit or any good result. So, for instance, if yes, they have planned, they have a brilliant design for a road or for a park in the city, but because of corruption, because of the laid back attitude of your civil servants, if they do not implement it well, it is going to turn into a disaster. So the way dedicated bus corridors have been created in Jaipur so that they can incentivize public transport and at the same time penalize personal transport vehicles, it has not been implemented well. You still find a lot of Scorpios, Fortuners running in those lanes, and is not ultimately yielding the desired benefits. So this is the idea about a lack of implementation of projects. Then we move on to various socio-cultural challenges when it comes to urbanization. Now let's do one thing for you. I'm just take a little time to absorb the ideas that we have discussed. Also, just think about the ethical perspectives that I've given, and take a short 10-minute break, and then we'll start a discussion on socio-cultural challenges. But please do come up with some ideas. I'll be eagerly waiting for your ideas. Right? This is how you learn. This is how you make your content, your answers, and everything better, and your personality better. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break and see you again at 1:31. And then we'll start with various socio-cultural challenges of urbanization. Welcome back, everyone. So I hope everyone's back. Okay, so far we have looked into the political challenges and economic challenges related to urbanization. And also, you have to remember that we do not have to think of these in watertight compartments. Because poverty, or say your slum areas or overcrowded slums, is an economic, social, and political challenge. It is a challenge on all the fronts. So we do not have to think of these challenges in watertight compartments. We have to see that you'll always find overlaps. You'll always find one affecting the other in some or the other manner. Moving on to socio-cultural challenges, that we find that because of this high population density in areas, your various indicators like health, education, etc., will be impacted. The question is how. So if you live in a very densely populated area, the chances of falling sick, the chances of getting affected by a communicable disease increases multifold. Similarly, if the area is highly dense or densely populated, you do not have sufficient infrastructure for drain. You would not have proper drainage facilities. You would not get clean drinking water, which is going to directly impact your health. Similarly, you'll have less number of seats in your educational institutions. You would not have good quality education available to all. These kind of problems will become social problems. Similarly, when it comes to slum expansion, you'll find that illiteracy, problems related to sanitation, problems related to water logging, problems related to not having a proper drainage system, etc., arise. Then you have a lot of child labor and child related crime or criminal activities in urban areas. Why? Because the population density is high, and you find that there are a lot of poor people coming to these cities in search of work. But the cost of living in cities is high. The cost of living is very high. So they do not have any other option but to engage the children in any kind of labor, engage their children in beggary, which becomes a problem. Similarly, there'll be a lot of criminal activities like child trafficking, trafficking children for prostitution, trafficking children for beggary. These kind of crimes will also increase. Then there is this problem of prostitution. Now, prostitution, obviously, it also has an ethical dimension, that whether they are free to take up any kind of economic opportunity that they want. But we find that at the heart of prostitution, you find it is their economic disadvantage. It is basically the basically poverty, which leads someone to take up an activity such as prostitution. And also, you have to ask this question, that these women who are engaged in prostitution, one, they are coming from very poor socioeconomic backgrounds. They are doing it to make a living. They are doing it to take care of their children. They're doing it to keep or to put food on the plate of their families. So one is that there is socio-economic disability that they face. And also, when it comes to prostitution as an activity, considering that there is no economic disparity in the society, considering that people have equal levels of income, people have equal kind of opportunities available, but would prostitution still be considered ethical or not? That is what the question is. Then moving on, that in cities you find that when it comes to urban areas, people migrate from rural to urban areas. They leave their families behind, they leave their friends behind, they leave all the members of their community behind. And now in these urban areas, they do not have anyone to take care of their emotional needs. They do not know anyone to talk to. They do not have anyone to communicate their ideas to. So they find themselves lonely in urban areas. And this is what the idea of alienation is, that they get alienated when it comes to the society. They get alienated with the work that they are doing. So we don't have to get into the theory of alienation of Karl Marx, but you have to understand that they find themselves lonely because they do not have that support system here in the cities. And also, as a consequence of urbanization, you find that there'll be a push towards individualism. And remember, when we are talking about modernization, because modernization is also a force of change. Just give me 1 second. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So, as a consequence of modernization, if you remember, we were saying that people will be pushed more and more towards individualism, that they would stop thinking about the community, because in rural areas we were saying that it is commune form of living, that people are connected to their community, people have a tendency of giving back to their community. But when it comes to urban areas, it is one for themselves. A person has to be only limited to their immediate needs, and they forget about the concerns of the community. And if you remember, we were talking about so if you take same-sex marriage, I'll just take this example to make you understand this idea. So if you take same-sex marriage, which is there in the news, you'll find there are two competing moral values. One idea is that a person should have the liberty, a person should have the freedom to marry anyone that they want. It has to be a person of their choice, no matter what their gender is. So it is about the value of liberty, the right to liberty of people. Also, at the same time, we find that marriage as an institution is a social institution, and any social institution will have a certain kind of function. We were saying that every institution has a certain function, and we have looked into the functions of marriage, we have looked into the functions of family. So every social institution has a function. So is the same-sex marriage going to fulfill the functions, or the functions that it is responsible for? Can it take up those functions? Can it take up the function of procreation when it comes to same-sex marriage? Would they make better parents, etc.? The right to adoption. All these functions of marriage as a social institution comes into picture. So there are two competing moral values. There are ones who believe in the utmost liberty, utmost freedom of an individual. Then there are others who say, no, the individual has to contribute to the society. They also have to take into account the needs of their own society. And this is actually the idea of same-sex marriage is basically a competition between these two values, to which value assign more value. So you find that when it comes to rural areas, the society has a lot of solidarity. People stay together. If there is a problem at all, people will come together to help each and everyone. But when it comes to urban areas, people have a tendency towards individualism. Their own needs, their specific needs, their particular needs, the needs of their family come at the topmost priority, and they forget completely about their responsibility to give back to the community. Moving on, other socio-cultural challenges are basically beggary. Because of poverty, people start asking for money to others. People engage in beggary. Now, beggary also has been institutionalized. Beggary, you will find that there is a nexus. They traffic children for beggary. So it works as an organized structure now, which is basically a crime against humanity, a crime against children. Similarly, newer issues related to health in urban areas are that of lifestyle. So most of the new diseases that you find are actually based in the urban lifestyle. So yes, there are other determinants of health as well, but your nutrition is important. So if you're not able to have a balanced diet, if you're not having a proper diet, if you're having junk food, it can ultimately lead to problems with your health. So that's why you find that the problem of obesity is increasing. The numbers of diseases related to heart, cholesterol, etc., are increasing in urban areas. Why? Because of their lifestyle. their lifestyle of having an unbalanced diet, having junk food. Similarly, not having sufficient physical activity being undertaken through the day. Take your car from the home, reach your office, sit there on your desk, work there, take your car, go back home. No physical activity whatsoever. And this is primarily because of the service sector. This is primarily because of the long working hours that people have to go through. And this unhealthy diet is, again, if you go to the market to check the prices of vegetables and fruits and pulses, etc., legumes, and then you compare it with the prices at which you get ready-made cooked junk food, you'll find that people have no other option but to rely on that. So a lot of people relying on breads, a lot of people relying on just having chapati or rice without having any, say, vegetables, without having any fruits, etc., which is primarily responsible for malnutrition. And yes, do not worry about it. We will be coming to malnutrition when we take up hunger, because hunger and malnutrition go hand in hand. And hunger has to be understood as malnutrition. So we'll take up that aspect there. But now you understand that this unhealthy lifestyle, these lifestyle problems are also a socio-cultural challenge related to urbanization. Then you have problems related to substance abuse, that people take up to drugs, people take to alcoholism. And you find that in the urban areas, they're more vulnerable to falling in this trap. Why? Because of the expansion of mass media, because of commercialization of entertainment. Now, these substances or these drugs have been popularized and legitimized by your mass media. You find it in movies and it becomes common. You find that in the Western culture, see, look at them. In the daytime, they're sitting on the couch and having beers or alcohol, which popularizes, at the same time legitimizes the use of any kind of these toxic elements. So these are also newer problems related to urbanization. Now, one idea was we look at the effects of urbanization and rather the challenges of urbanization that we have looked into. Now, what we have to see is that how this urbanization impacts various social institutions, how this urbanization impacts various social groups. Now, if you remember from our first chapter and our second chapter on globalization, you find that we have already looked into how the institution of family, how the institution of caste, how the institution of marriage is changing. To find out change, what were we doing? We were looking into the functions of these institutions and the features of these institutions. That what are the functions and how is it changing? What are the features? How is it changing? So we have to proceed in the same manner, and the changes remain the same. Because if you remember in first chapter, when we are talking about the changes related to the institution of family, urbanization was one of the factors. That urbanization is bringing about these changes. Also, when we are going through globalization, we were primarily thinking of global examples or examples of globalization to find out the impact on these social institutions. So we have to proceed in the same manner. Also, most of your points remain the same, because urbanization and globalization again go hand in hand. Then also, urbanization is a component of modernization. So the answer more or less remains the same, apart from the examples that you use to substantiate. So if you talk about globalization, you'll talk about the impact of foreign culture or Western culture on Indian society. Similarly, when you talk about rural and urban, you'll talk primarily in the light of modernization. You'll talk primarily in the light of breaking down of the structure of joint family that was there in traditional India. So now let's do this exercise with family so that you understand that how you have to proceed with the relationship between urbanization and family. Now, if I say what kind of impact urbanization has on family, so if you think about impact, again, it is going to be positive and negative. And the same pointers will have both positive and negative impact, right? So just think about it. What were the, if I ask you this question, what were the functions of family? Does anyone remember? And let's see if you have revised it all through the week. What are the functions of family? If maybe you can list one or two, I'll be more than happy. Socialization of children, one, great. Any other function? Socialization of children is their upbringing. So they are the same points. If you remember, socialization, the primary socialization is upbringing, providing economic cooperation, psychological support, etc. Right? These were basic functions. Now let's look at them in the light of urbanization. Now, with urbanization, we find that the joint family system has disintegrated and transitioned into your nuclear family system, which will be covered under features. We'll come to that. And you find that socialization of children is no more considered to be the only responsibility of their parents, of the family. Now, this socialization of children is being taken up by your specialized institutions like your schools, daycares. Similarly, the socialization of children is also happening because of the role of mass media. Right? Rather than learning through their family, through their parents, they learn through their smartphones now. They have online classes, they have digital content, they have a lot of poems, rhymes, etc. available on YouTube, and which is becoming their primary source of socialization. Now, one idea is, just remember this, please be careful about this. So one thing is that this is the change. There has been change in socialization of children. Socialization of children was being taken up by family previously. Now this socialization is being taken up by your specialized institutions and mass media. Right? What is this? This depicts change. And what we also have to look into is, what is the consequence of this change? This change in socialization can have both positive and negative impacts. I hope you're getting the point. I'll repeat. One of the function of family, that is socialization of children, is changing. It is changing so that the socialization of children is now being taken up by mass media and specialized institutions like school, crèches, daycares, etc. in place of the family. This is what this depicts social change. Now, this social change can have consequences. The social change can have positive consequences, and the social change can have negative consequences. Now, yes, you can definitely think about negative consequences easily. My question is directed on positive consequences. What are the positive consequences of this change in socialization of children? What are the positive impacts of these specialized institutions like schools and mass media, etc., taking up the task of socializing the children? What can be the positive impacts? Please suggest, because negative ones are fairly simple. Okay, it can lead to more awareness about the surroundings, about what is happening in the society. Visual imagination of children is increasing through learning from these digital means. Lovely. They are now getting scientific approach towards things. Right? Previously, the socialization of children by the institution of family was limited to their religion. They'll teach you about various religious scriptures, they'll teach you about morality, but again, primarily everything was based in religion. Now these specialized institutions follow a scientific approach. Also, don't you think they get exposed to a diversity of ideas? They get exposed to diverse ideas in the institutions, diverse religions, diverse cultures. They get to know about each other's cultures. There is a lot of cultural or acculturation. They start thinking about things rationally, etc. Lovely. So now you remember that whatever the components of modernization were there can be extended to the positive consequences of change in socialization of children. Similarly, if you think about negative, now they are not able to pass on their culture from one generation to another. The culture is not is say on a decline. Now you cannot control what is available on social media, because they can learn positive as well as negative things from social media. These can be what? These can be negative impacts of urbanization on the function of socialization of children by family. So similarly, you can think about others, right? That whatever they learn, they might not learn the values that are required to keep the society intact. They get exposed to a diversity of views, which ultimately leads to confusion. For instance, I think I gave you this example of having a lot of genders and people relating to animate objects, identifying to animate objects. What is that? A mere confusion in their viewpoints. Sexuality and sexual orientation is simply understood because it has been there. But identifying as an animate object, getting yourself, say, transformed into an animate object or like an animal, what is this? This is the confusion that your mass media and the proliferation of ideas and views on mass media brings. So yes, there has been democratization when it comes to proliferation of ideas on social media. That means now anyone can publish their views. You do not have to write an entire book. Now everyone has this right to publish their views, as long as they do not, say, fall into the say they do not get into the defamation of someone else, or if at all it is fake, or if at all it is wrong, hateful, etc. There are few conditions, but yes, everyone has a right to get their ideas published. But with this democratization, you find that you have no control whatsoever on the ideas that you publish there. And that's why you find that as a negative consequence of mass media on children, their interpersonal skills, their sense of living in a community, their sense of giving it back to the society is on a decline. Now they want to earn more and more and keep it to themselves. Now it is about generating a lot of personal wealth, because on mass media you find examples of children as young as 20, 22 years old earning more than 1 million every day. And this is the kind of idea, this is the uh, glitter of the new modern lifestyle that children see, without realizing that it is not actually contributing at all in a positive manner to the society. They get exposed to pornography, etc. So these can be negative consequences. So I'll repeat myself again. What I'm saying is that various functions and features of family as an institution are undergoing change. One is that change. That how is it changing? We are saying that the as features, one of the feature of traditional Indian society was joint family. Now this joint family is getting converted into nuclear family. What is this? Social change. But this conversion of joint family into nuclear family, the transition from joint to nuclear family, will have consequences. It'll have both positive and negative consequences. Let's repeat this exercise with this, so that you are aware that how to go about these kind of questions. So as a positive consequence, we find that nuclear families are more egalitarian in nature. Nuclear families have even distribution of authority. In nuclear families, individuals have more freedom, more liberty to develop their personality. But as a consequence, or as a negative consequence, as a lopside of this nuclearization of families, you find that your family system is dying down. They are not being able to pass on their culture, their tradition. Just think about this. From your grandparents, your parents have learned a lot. They know a lot about, say, traditional medicine, that what has to be given or what food has to be consumed if you have, say, common cold, what foods have to be avoided, etc. They know the basics of it. But now, while living in your hostel or living in your, say, flat apartment, etc., somewhere in your college or around your workplace, you find that you have to Google everything. You have to get a doctor's prescription. Now, I'm not saying that taking a doctor's prescription is bad, but for something as usual as common cold or something as simple as common cold, you should be able to handle it yourself. Similarly, you do not know about your tradition, your culture. So we are losing culture because of this nuclearization of family. Similarly, one of the functions of family was economic cooperation. So if there is a member in the family who is differently abled, who are not able to earn their livelihood, the family as a whole will take care of them. But what happens in a nuclear family? They get isolated, they live separately, you live separately. Who takes care of their economic security? Who takes care of the social security, psychological needs of the elderly now in nuclear family? Absolutely no one, because they're left in the rural areas and no one at all to cater to their emotional needs, cater to their economic security, cater to their social requirements or needs. So these can be various negative consequences of nuclearization of families. So what you have to do is, if at all there is a question which talks about relationship between urbanization and the institution of family, two things have to be remembered: that the changes can be basically captured from the functions and the features of these institutions. That what changes have, say, one of the features of family as an institution is patriarchy. But with urbanization, with nuclearization of family, you find that this patriarchal structure is breaking down. The system is becoming more and more egalitarian. So what is this? Basically, a change in a feature of family as an institution. But every change has a consequence. So you have to remember that the consequences have to be mentioned in your notes. Now, we cannot go on doing this exercise with each and every element, each and every feature, because now you have understood it well. And what I would request you to do is just please take up your pen and paper during, like while creating your notes, and do this exercise to multiple functions and your multiple features. Because looking at the questions, you find that this year there was a question in paper one, and I think I've already shown you that question about marriage as an institution, changing nature of marriage as an institution. So that question was not directed on the social change, but the consequences of social change, right? So your ideas about social change have to be, say, extended to consequences of these social change, and these consequences have very well been understood by you from our chapter on globalization. So in globalization, we were talking about the change that it has brought about and also the consequences of that change. So I hope this idea about the changes that are coming into the that have been brought about in the institution of family are clear. Similarly, we can think about how the institution of caste is changing with urbanization. Now, I'll ask you a simple question: that how to approach this question, if at all this is asked, that what is the impact of urbanization on the institution of caste system? What is the impact of urbanization on the institution of caste system? How do you approach it? What all factors do you take into account? Anyone? So Aditya, you are saying, you are making a loose statement saying the caste is getting diluted. The caste system is getting diluted. It is right. But how do you go about it? How do you look into it? And I've taught you this way already. And I expect you people to answer this. Caste turns into class. That is also right. But how do you approach it? Okay, I'll just repeat myself. If you want to capture the changes in the institution of caste, how do you do it? Through its features. Its features like endogamy. Its features like restricted occupation. Its features like various social disabilities. There were disabilities that people from different castes cannot live together or cannot, say, be seen together. People from different castes cannot marry each other, etc. So if you want to capture the changes in the caste system, the best way to do it is through features. The statements that you have suggested are not wrong. They're correct. They're perfectly right. But those can be used as supporting statements. Those can be used in introduction and conclusion. If you want to think about that, yes, if you want to conclude this thing, you can say that the caste system is getting diluted and it is giving way to class based hierarchy, etc. Yes, that is fine to the extent of conclusion or introduction. But when it comes to the body part, if you want to discuss the body part of this question, that how caste as a system or caste as an institution is undergoing change, you look at various features of the caste system that we have already discussed, and then you think about the changes and the factors of continuity in this institution. I hope this idea is clear. So if you want to look into the changes in caste system, you say that now endogamy is more acceptable. Oh, sorry, endogamy is not strictly followed and intercaste marriages are more acceptable now. Similarly, you say that anyone for that matter can take up any occupation that they want. Now they are not restricted by their caste to take up a particular specified occupation. So Brahmin can take up the occupation of a Kshatriya. Similarly, someone coming from the so-called lower caste can take up the occupation of a teacher that was traditionally being given to Brahmins, for that matter. So similarly, you take up other features of the caste system, and with respect to caste system, family and marriage, we have done all the exercises possible. And now what you have to do is you have to go back to a question papers of the previous years, look at all the questions, and you'll find that all these questions revolve around these ideas, that how they are undergoing social change and what are the consequences of these social changes. This is what the questions revolve around. These are the ideas. And if you understand these ideas, your job is done. The way you had asked me a question about the consequences, or what is the relevance of, you'll find, sorry. So when it comes to paper one and same-sex marriage, you find that same-sex marriage, leave the constitutional dimension aside. If you look at same-sex marriage, you'll find that it is a departure from the traditional marriage system. It is departure from the institution of marriage that was there in traditional Indian society. So if there is a departure, there is a social change. So yes, it is going to bring about a social change, and same-sex marriage in itself is a social change. And then we also have to think about the consequences of same-sex marriage. That is what the idea is. Because if you allow same-sex marriage, the functions of the family as an institution are going to change. If you allow same-sex marriage, the features of marriage as an institution are going to change, which can have both positive and negative consequences. And that's how you have to approach these questions. Because the approach in paper one and paper two when it comes to social issues and justice is important. Because look at the questions, the kind of questions that they have asked in the past. Very particular, very specific, and need a lot of conceptual understanding. You cannot just merely write all the facts there and get away with it. Because this is the way in which it is generally taught, without aligning it to the demand of the examination. They say that write these facts to substantiate. But if you do not understand the structure, if you do not understand the concepts, the facts are not going to help. Facts, yes, they help you fetch an extra mark. They give you an edge because you will be able to substantiate your statement. But there is a limitation to the extent to which you can remember all the facts. So please remember this. Please try to revise these concepts after the class is done, because I'm disheartened to see that you're not able to approach this. Because when it comes to changes in the caste system, we have discussed it multiple times, and at the beginning of the session we kept it at a very low level so that everyone is able to understand and relate, because people come from diverse backgrounds, right? So please try to revise it and try writing the practice questions that I've provided. Okay, the way we have looked at the impact of urbanization on social institutions, we also have to look at the impact of urbanization on various sections of the society. Now, one idea is, if you want to look at the impact of urbanization on women as a section of society, how do you go about it? What you have to do is you take up various dimensions of life. Economic dimension of women's life. You take up political dimension of women's life. You take up socio-cultural dimension of women's life, right? Is there an easier way compared to this? Rather than taking up dimension, is there any other easier way? And the answer is no. This is the easiest way in which you can proceed. This is the easiest way in which you can dissect the question. Now again, we are reading this in paper one, so the questions will generally be limited to the socio-cultural dimension. But it does not mean that you do not have to highlight the economic and political dimension. So if they have asked a specific question on the socio-cultural dimension, and even if they have kept it a general question, most of the weightage goes to socio-cultural dimension. But yes, you do give a brief idea about how urbanization, how globalization impacts the economic and political life of women as well. Similarly, if they ask a question about any other, say, section of the society, you have to break it down in dimensions, which will make your task easier. Now, coming to this question, what kind of impact does urbanization have on women? Now, the first idea is, you would say that the women have more liberty. Living in urban areas, they do not have to follow the same old regressive traditional norms. Also, you'll find they can go out and work now, taking care of their economic independence. They are the ones who are going to contribute to family income now. Also, with their economic empowerment, they are going to get empowered on a social level as well, because they'll command more respect in the society and within the family. That is what the impact of urbanization on women is going to be. But then again, this is going to be both negative and positive in nature. Now, women are the ones who have to take to dual burden of work. Women are the ones who have to basically take care of the household activities and their economic activities as well. So dual burden of work. Similarly, when you look at the urban areas, the crimes against women have increased. Cyber crimes against women. So newer forms of crimes against women are taking shape. Similarly, we say that become urban areas become centers of prostitution. For that matter, the prostitution is more prevalent in urban areas compared to rural areas, so which directly relates to trafficking of women, which directly relates to violence against women. So there can be multiple problems, consequences of impact of urbanization of women. The only idea is you have to see how you have to approach it, because role of women and the changing role of women will be taken up as a separate chapter, because it is one of the part of your syllabus. So I hope you got the idea that you want to look at the impact of globalization of women, you take up various dimensions of their life. If you want to look at the role of urbanization and women, or the impact of urbanization of women, you take up various dimensions of their life. Now they'll be more aware, they'll be able to take care of their health related needs, the maternal mortality rates will go down, the fertility rates will go down, they'll have more say when it comes to family planning. So all these are basically consequences of urbanization. What we'll do is, when we take up role of women, you'll get a more structured answer to this question. But you not have to wait for that chapter, and what you have to do is, as and when you get time, today or tomorrow, take up this exercise on urbanization and women, elderly, because women and elderly have been specifically covered, and so you cannot have an excuse. These have been specifically covered in context of globalization. So elderly, women, and children. So you have to remember all the dimensions. So if you think about children, you have to think about the institution of family as well, because they are one of the components of the institution of family. And the role of family to nurture the children, to socialize the children, has also changed. So that also is going to impact children, which will basically be considered as impact of urbanization on children. So, okay, you're suggesting sexual harassment at workplace, right? Say not treating them fairly in terms of promotion, the concept of glass ceiling, pink collar jobs, etc. We'll come to all that with our chapter on role of women. But you have to carry out this exercise, one with women, with elderly, and then with children. So please do this. Take up various dimensions of their life. So when it comes to children, health, education, they become important. Socialization, take up these dimensions. Look at what kind of impact urbanization has. And also, please tell me if you have any doubts, any questions from the weekly test. First, please tell me this thing. Has anyone cared about writing the weekly test? Did you write the weekly test? Because I did not find a lot of answer sheets on IS Live, for that matter, which shows that only a few of you have written the test paper, which is not the way in which you have to proceed with this subject or the preparation in general. Because if you think that I'll cover the syllabus first, then I'll start revision, I'll look at all the questions, I'll start writing, it's never going to happen. Trust me on that. It's never going to happen. So if it has to happen, it has to happen now. Else, you'll be lagging a lot behind compared to other people, other students whom you are going to compete with. Okay, so the ones who have written the test, if you have any questions regarding the weekly test, you can also ask in the same session. Anyways, these are longer sessions. We have enough space, enough time to take it or to cater to those questions. Okay, moving on. Urbanization and elderly, you have to take up this exercise yourself, because elderly and your globalization has been covered. Moving on to the next part, which is about government intervention. That what kind of interventions do you find from government in curbing this menace that has been created by over urbanization of our cities. So we see that there are a lot of challenges and we have a lot of government interventions with respect to this. Now, what we'll do is we are not going to cover the factual details of Clean India program, Smart City Mission, etc., PM Awas Yojana. What you have to do is, because you go through these government schemes, etc., interventions in the newspaper with your current affairs, you already go through these. What you have to do is you have to relate these to your static part, so that whatever challenge is there, because whenever there are challenges in the question, if you remember, we were saying that if you have to write negatives in the body, you always come up with the positive way forward to counterbalance, right? So in questions on urbanization, you'll definitely need the kinds of government interventions that you find with respect to fixing the challenges related to urbanization. Please do that. Please take up these government interventions, mention them with your notes. So when it comes to problems of, say, housing, you talk about PM Awas Yojana. When it comes about it is there about, say, clean drinking water, you talk about Jal Jeevan Mission. When it comes to electricity, not having clean cooking fuel, etc., you have various government schemes, government interventions that are there. Please keep writing them, because you are ultimately going to need those while writing conclusions of your answer. I'm not saying that they'll definitely ask a question on urbanization, but if at all a question is asked on urbanization, you should be ready. And also, they have asked a specific question on smart city program already. So what is the smart city program, etc., because it relates directly to urbanization, and you should be aware. Yes, it was more in context of human geography, but again, it is related, directly related to your social issue syllabus as well, because it talks about urbanization, it talks about fixing the challenges related to urbanization. But those, trust me, those are very simple questions that you can answer, because you already know all the components, because you would have just written prelims examination, and you get these 3 months, you have most of that content fresh in your mind. So you'll remember if at all a question on a direct scheme is asked. So they'll be very simple questions when it comes to mains. But yes, they've asked those questions as an exception. But the general rule is that they'll ask more of conceptual questions. So moving on, we said that we had a lot of problems related to urbanization. We had various challenges. How can you fix them? This is the basic framework. So we were saying that on the level of governance, there is a problem of accountability and transparency, and we were talking about measures there. Similarly, when it comes to planning, we were talking about the problem related to urban planning. When it comes to financing, we are talking about the local bodies or the urban local bodies not having sufficient autonomy to use the finances as they want. Similarly, we're talking about that the cities do not have the capacity, or the public transport or the public infrastructure is overburdened. So we have to build the capacity of our cities. And also, along with this, you have to remember about innovation, newer ideas, newer suggestions coming up in newspapers. So what happens is that in your newspapers, they'll say your civil servants are basically someone is responsible for urban planning. They're going through a lot of things. They come across a kind of methodology that is being followed, say, in France, and they'll find that, oh, this is a very fine structure. This is something that can be tweaked a little to suit the Indian requirements and established here, which is going to bear fruit. So they'll come up with those newer plans, suggestions, etc. Some of them fail, but some of them work very well. So these kind of innovative ideas, etc., will be found in newspaper, because whatever information I provide here will be limited in scope, because all I can do is till today I can maybe update you. But what about what comes in the newspaper tomorrow? So there can be newer ideas. So congestion tax coming from London is an innovative idea, even though it has been borrowed in a sense from another country. But yes, it is an innovative idea to penalize entry of vehicles in a few areas. Similarly, putting up metro rail system, rapid transit system, etc., are also innovations that we find. But yes, they were innovation for that time. But today, if you find, there are new methods coming up, your dedicated bus corridors for that matter. So please remember that when you think of a way forward for these challenges related to urbanization, what you have to do is you have to think about the structure, that what are the problems related to governance, how I can fix that. What are the problems related to planning, financing, etc., and how I can fix that. And what I've done is, so one is that we have already covered it with our challenges. Another thing is I have given you a few points, etc. here that can be covered easily. Easy to understand. Everything has already been discussed. Just go through these 2-3 slides, and you'll know that what is it. And if at all there is a problem, let me know. But otherwise, see, talk about public participation. We had discussed about public participation. Then we are talking about sustainable development. We were talking about waste management strategies, segregating waste at the source. And I think I'd given you example of various municipalities like Bangalore, that how they segregate waste. Then the problem of transparency and accountability, etc. So all these things that we have just discussed with the challenges related to urbanization are mentioned here. So please go through them. And I've given everything in one place, and I've given that structure which will help you conceptualize your answers. They are not going to ask a specific question on governance related problems of urbanization in the paper, but yes, when you structure your answer, it is going to go a long way. Okay, now let's look at these previous year questions. First, let's take up this question that I had shown you at the start of the session, that India has not been able to tap the full potential of urbanization. Discuss. A very simple question indeed. The only thing you have to do is you have to understand the context. So the urbanization, basically, you see that people get pulled towards urban areas because of various factors: better economic opportunities, better living conditions, better remuneration when it comes to work, better quality of education, better quality of healthcare, etc. Which is what? Which is the full potential of urbanization, that you get what urbanization is promised. But if in case of India, we find that urbanization has not yielded the desired result. There are problems when it comes to providing employment to all. There are problems in providing clean drinking water to all. There are problems providing housing facilities to all, which is what? That urbanization is not living up to its full potential. So in this question, what you basically have to do is you have to highlight the shortcomings of urbanization. But in the introduction, you prepare the context that this is the full potential. These are the promises of urbanization, which urbanization has not been able to fulfill. And then you start taking them up one by one. The way we have structured in our PPTs, the way we have discussed, this is going to be your answer. So you know the introduction part, you know the say body part. In introduction, you can maybe contextualize, you can just give them a background that how there are a lot of challenges related to urbanization. Else you can start with multiple examples or newer problems that are coming up. And in the conclusion, you obviously know, because we are writing a lot negative in the body part, so what we have to do is in conclusion we have to make it positive. So you can talk about various suggestions to help us realize the full potential of urbanization. You can talk about various government initiatives wherein they try to fix the challenges related to urbanization. So I hope this question, a fairly simple question, is understood. Please give a quick thumbs up if you are able to understand this question. This is not a tough question. It is a very simple question. All you have to do is you have to maintain the flow in your answer and structure your answer very well. So, okay, one person is able to get it. How about others? Please suggest if you'll be able to take up this question, if you are able to understand this question. Do you want me to repeat this question? Please respond. Because it is not, I told you on the very first day, there is not going to be a one-way communication. It's not going to be a monologue. I'm going to ask you to contribute to the discussion. Anyone? Okay, great. Moving ahead. The growth of cities as IT hubs has opened up new avenues of employment, but have also created new problems. Substantiate this statement with examples. Now, in this question, you find that the question has two arguments. One is that growth of cities as IT hubs. Again, you remember growth of cities as IT hubs. So we are not going to bring bring up, say, issues related to industrialization here, right? So we'll come to that. So it has two ideas. One is new opportunities of employment, and the second part says that it has created new problems. And particularly your IT hubs. That means the question talks about the newer opportunities of employment that the service sector has generated. One. Second thing is, what are the new problems related to service sector or related to urbanization because of service sector? Because in case of India, we said that in India it is a peculiar phenomena in the sense that everywhere else you find that urbanization was followed by industrialization. But in case of India, it was primarily the tertiary sector, it is primarily the service sector which has brought about rapid urbanization. So this is something that we are already clear about. Now you see that what are these new employment opportunities? New is the word here. So we have to remember what are the new employment opportunities. Similarly, we have to talk about the new problems. So yes, you can also include old problems like pollution, which still remain. Yes, but they have to come at the bottom in hierarchy. When you start prioritizing your points, you have to think about the new problems and new avenues first. And also you have to substantiate this with examples. Now, again, if you think about introduction, there can be multiple introductions. One idea is, and again, in the body part, you're going to give almost equal weightage to these two parts. What are these new employment opportunities? And also, what are the new problems? This is something that you have to think about and give equal weightage in. And when you have problems in the body, what do? You write suggestions or government interventions in your conclusion part. So I hope the structure of the answer is clear. Okay, so now start suggesting what are these new employment opportunities. Jayant, let's talk about the new employment opportunities first. And then we'll come to the challenges part, new problems part. Anyone who can suggest what are these new opportunities? See, one is new avenues in the sense that you have multiple growing fields when it comes to the service sector, the field of hospitality, right? Similarly, you have an ever growing gig economy in these IT hubs. You have people working in Zomato, Swiggy, etc. The gig economy, that is new. The newer jobs, like something related to artificial intelligence, then you have jobs related to data mining, data structuring, etc., data analysis. So these are the newer kind of employment opportunities. Then also, to maintain these offices, you need working people. You need people who can take care of the basic needs of others, the office staff that you have. Similarly, you'll find, yes, the hospitality sector, you'll have multiple corporate events. So you need event management people to take care of those events, right? So these are the newer kind of employment opportunities or newer avenues of employment that IT hubs have opened up. Also, now let's start thinking about newer problems of traffic jam, newer problems. Now just think about this, because we are talking about service sector, we see there is a lot of digital instruments being used, a lot of electronic equipments being used. But how do you dispose the e-waste? So e-waste becomes a new problem. Similarly, you find that uh, the problems related to health, for that matter, health of individuals, is a new problem related to IT hubs. Why? Because people work in night shifts now. The ones working in night shift do not get to experience the sun because they'll be asleep through the day. And you find that increasing incidence of vitamin D deficiency in people. The newer lifestyle problems are also created by IT hubs. We are talking about lack of physical activity. We were talking about uh, not being able to have a balanced diet. Then you can think about the stress. You can think about various issues related to health, like hypertension, anxiety, long working hours, etc. Similarly, newer problems also include that people are not able to give sufficient time to their family. So these can be new problems that are being created. So you have to think about these problems in context of various kind of economic, you have to think in economic dimension. Then you can also think about the social dimension, socio-cultural dimension. Now also these IT hubs, you'll find in these IT hubs, they'll absorb most of the skilled labor. In IT hubs, and as something, Jen, I think you had mentioned this point. So you find that people have the people that they need are actually skilled. They need skilled labor. They do not have any kind of place for unskilled labor. So this is also a newer problem. Also, with artificial intelligence, etc., growing, you find that even these skilled laborers find themselves jobless at times. There can be mass layoffs, etc. So what are these? They are newer problems of these IT hubs. So traffic jam, traffic management becomes an issue, etc. So what you have to do is you have to come up with suggestion. And also you have to keep giving examples with whatever points you mention here. Now I hope, yes, cyber crimes is a problem. Yes. Now you see that how do you have to structure this. Also you have to remember, when you talk about, say, pollution, or you talk about the environmental challenges of IT hubs, you talk about ozone layer depletion because of say your CFCs, etc. Similarly, when you talk about the pollution in IT hubs, you have to talk about vehicular pollution rather than industrial pollution. I'm not saying that IT hubs do not have industries. So, for instance, Bangalore is an IT hub. They have a lot of industries which pollute the environment, but they are talking specifically about issues which are being created by the growth of cities as IT hubs. So all the dimensions, be it environment, be it economic, be it socio-cultural, you have to cover all the dimensions when it comes to problems. And the socio-cultural dimension takes the center stage, so it has to be given more weightage. But again, remember, do not think about the problems related to industries, particularly when it comes to environment, because otherwise the problems are going to remain more or less the same. So for instance, uh, overcrowding. And again, the challenges which have been there since the very beginning have to find a place, but they have to find a place towards the bottom. So you should know how to prioritize your answer. You should know how to carefully read a statement. Because most of the people, even though this is a simple question, most of the people would not score average marks in this question. Why? Because they would not read the statement carefully. They would not understand they're talking specifically about IT hubs. They're talking specifically about new employment opportunities. They're talking specifically about new problems created by the growth of cities as IT hubs. So please be careful while reading the question. New avenues can simply be related to newer economic opportunities. So be it entrepreneurs. So you can talk about the startup culture, because to lay down an industry, for instance, for an example, to lay down an industry, you need a lot of resources. But to start working on a startup, maybe some kind of digital service that you provide, all you need is a laptop. You do not even need a basic infrastructure of office. You can do it from your home. So what are these newer avenues of employment? So it is not just that they have created new employment opportunities, but they have also created newer entrepreneurial opportunities. So you have to remember both the things. So please tell me if the question is clear, and you'll be able to write the answer. Please try writing this answer, because again, this is a specific question. This is directed on a specific part. Okay, great. Now there is another practice question for you, which talks about urbanize. I'm not going to discuss the answer. I'll just tell you the basic structure so that you can write it yourself. The question says, urbanization in India. Yes, we can definitely quote specific job names there, because if you look at the question itself says substantiate the statement with examples, right? So you can definitely mention specific job names there. Urbanization in India is occurring not due to urban pull, but due to rural push. Analyze. Simple question again, but it'll help you in, say, improving your writing skills. It'll help you in uh, making your answer look better. Right. Now the question says, question talks about two things. That urbanization, we already know urbanization can happen because of urban pull, and urbanization can happen because of rural push. Right. These are two simple ideas that this is how urbanization can happen. Now the question asks you that please write about how urbanization in India is occurring because of rural push. So this is going to take the center stage. This is going to be your body part. That you, in the body part, you have to talk about what is this rural push? What are these factors of pushing people from rural areas to urban areas? One is that, thereby leading to urbanization. Another idea is that we know that yes, urban pull is also a factor. So what do? You also give urban pull a glimpse. You talk about urban pull briefly, that there are factors, that the IT jobs are there in urban areas to which people get attracted. Better economic educational institutions are in urban areas, which get people attracted to urban pull. So urban pull has to be given very less weightage. So maybe in 2 or 3 lines, you talk about urban pull as well in your conclusion, so that you show them that it is not just rural push, but urban pull as well, which is causing urbanization. Yes, Aditya, you're thinking in the right direction. I'm not going to disclose your answer. I'm not going to say make it public so that others can also think and write for themselves. So this is a practice question that you have to take up. Please do practice this question. Fairly easy question, but it'll help you refine your writing skills. Okay, moving on to the next chapter, which is about population and associated issues. So you can think of it as demographic studies. Now, population is something that everyone has some idea or the other about. Population, the questions on population are more or less going to be simple, but I'll give you a few instances where they have asked a little advanced question on population. So what we'll do here is we'll understand various aspects of population, various aspects of demography, and then what we'll do is we'll right away jump to the associated issues related to population, because one of the issues that comes to your mind when you think of population is overpopulation, the growth rate of our population, which becomes a problem. But you'll find that there are other issues related to population as well. So what we'll do is we'll understand what is the idea of population, etc., population density, and then we'll straight away jump into the associated issues, because that's where they ask question from. Okay, great. So let's look at this question. Now also you'll find increasing number of questions where they ask questions coming from multiple chapters. For instance, in the previous chapter on globalization, you found a question which relates globalization to role of women. Role of women is one chapter, one topic in the syllabus. Globalization is another. But they have asked a question combining the both. Similarly, you'll find questions on role of women and population, poverty and population. Now, this is going to be the trend. These are the kind of questions that you are going to find in the question paper, in the previous year question papers. But I'm not saying that it will increase the complexity of the question. The question will still remain simple, but again, it will demand a very specific answer. And now I hope you understand the point in the first lecture where I told you that the general understanding of society that you have is not going to be sufficient. And you see that there is a lot to learn about these specific topics, about the very specific to the point questions that they ask. So you need a good understanding of these institutions, of these sections, of these forces of change. Okay, coming to the previous year question that has been asked regarding population, you find that they are talking about one of the issues related to population, that is growing population, one of the issues related to population, and they are relating it to poverty. Now, we are not going to take up this question now. We'll take this question up towards the end of the session. Towards the end, we'll take up this question. because you would not be able to answer this now, but understand they have asked a question relating poverty and population growth, right? Similarly, they had asked a question about women empowerment or role of women, you can call it anything, and related it to, again, population growth. So they have taken up one of the challenges related to population or one of the associated issues of population and related it to another chapter. So we have to be, again, conceptually very sound to understand these questions. Look at this next question. Empowering women is the key to control population growth. Population growth, one of the issues related to population, and women empowerment. So relationship between these two. Now, starting with our basics, the first idea is, what is population? Now, population is the number of people living in a definite territory, in a defined territory. This is what population is. You do not have to remember the definitions because they're never going to ask you definitions. And if at all they ask you a definition, it is a fairly simple concept. Now, there are people living within this territory. So the number of people will become what? Population. But if you take up a specific area, say this area, and you ask that what is the number of people living in this particular area, it becomes its population density. That is number of people per unit land area. Number of people living in this particular area is the population density of that area. What is population? The number of people living in that area is population. Number of people living per square unit of that land is what? Population density. So you have to remember this, because with urbanization, we were saying that population density is a problem, that we have very high population density when it comes to urban areas. Now, coming to the other part, if you look into this population within this territory, you'll find that there are people coming from different genders. There are people coming from various age groups. There are people coming from various caste-based groups. There are people coming from various religions. There are people coming from various class. But here in our chapter, what becomes most important for us is these two factors of composition. That is, one is age and the other one is sex. Because there'll be female members in this population, there'll be third gender in this population, there'll be children, there'll be elderly, there'll be working age population on the basis of age. So these two factors of composition of population, age and sex, become important for our understanding, because that's where they're going to direct their questions. Now, when you talk about population, you find that there is, say, an uneven distribution of population. Uneven distribution of population, right? You find that your hilly areas, your remote areas, your forests, your deserts are very scarcely populated. You have very less number of people living in those areas. Similarly, if you go to the cities, urban areas, if you go to your fertile plains, you find that the population and the population density is very high. That means there is an uneven distribution or uneven spread of population across our country. Not just our country, but in general. The first thing that you have to think about is, what are the factors affecting this uneven distribution of population across the country? So when you think of these factors, you think of geographical factors, you think of socioeconomic factors, you think of political factors, you can think of environmental factors, right? For instance, if there's a place or there is a geographical area where the terrain is very difficult, like your hills, like your forests, the terrain is very difficult. In your hilly areas, again, to carry out agriculture, it is very difficult. To carry out day-to-day activities, it is very difficult. To create or to construct a home, it is very difficult. So you find that a lot of people would not be living in those areas. Similarly, when it comes to urban areas, you find that, particularly when you come to geographical factors, you find that if the area is plain, if the area has better resources for agriculture, most of the population will be located there. So take the context of India. Till today, you find that the hilly areas and your deserted areas and your forested areas are very scarcely populated. The population density is very low. The overall population is also very low. But previously as well, traditionally, you find that most of the people were either located in the urban centers of the time. Those were basic trade centers like Delhi, right? They were trade centers where a lot of trade was carried out. Otherwise, most of the people were living in fertile plains. Why? Because the primary activity, primary economic activity was agriculture. So most of the people were engaged in agriculture, and you'll find that it is very easy to grow, to produce, to have high productivity in fertile lands compared to any other area where you have arid or semi-arid soil. So geographical factors, the terrain, the fertility of soil, etc., will impact the spread of population. Moving on to the various socioeconomic factors like availability of economic opportunities. Similarly, you'll find the kind of mineral, etc., resources that are available, the level of urbanization in that area. All these factors and other social factors like caste-based atrocities will also, all these factors will affect the spread of population. Similarly, there can be political factors, like if the government is authoritarian, if there is political conflict going on, people will start evading that region. You think of Syria, because of the perpetual political struggle, because of the perpetual war and violence that people have to go through, people start vacating those areas and start settling in other countries, in other areas. So there can be multiple factors, including environmental factors. If there is a region which is prone to floods, if there is a region which is prone to pollution, the spread of population is going to be uneven. People will start leaving those areas. But also, you will find exceptions. I'll give you an exception right away. Exception of Delhi. Now, the environmental factors play heavily when it comes to Delhi. The levels of air pollution, the levels of water pollution, the levels of land pollution are very high in Delhi. But still, you find that the population and population density are both high. At the same time, the population growth rate is also high. That the number of people coming to live in Delhi is also high. Why? Because generally your socio-economic factors take priority over all other factors. So generally, if you have to prioritize, the first thing that you'll keep on the priority list is your life. So if there is violence, war, etc., you would not want to live there. Post that, it is generally your various economic factors which decide the area in which you would want to live. And all the other environmental considerations, political considerations will take a back seat. Because you might be, say, in favor of a particular government, you might be coming from a particular ideology. But if you do not find a proper economic opportunity, you would not want to go in that area, even though it is aligned to your, say, political system or it is aligned to your political ideology. So generally, within these factors, there'll be a priority list, which again is based on individual needs and individual wants. That some might give economic factors a priority over their life. Some might give environmental factors a priority over all the other factors. So we can say that it is not only one factor which is responsible for the spread of population, but it is a mix of all these factors which decide which area will be densely populated and which area will not have a lot of population. So these are basic factors affecting the spread of population. Now we know that one of the major problem that we are going to face in terms of population is the problem of increase in population. Some of you might think that increase in population is a problem because of overburdening of resources. But some of you might think that if we have a huge population, if we have a huge working age population, we can contribute to economic development more compared to any other region. So we can reap the demographic dividend because of our huge population. So you can have different views and we'll come to that idea. But one thing is that we have to understand the factors affecting this population growth. So one is factors affecting the spread of population, and the other thing is factors affecting population growth. So if you want to increase a population, or say if you think of increase in population, you'll primarily think of two factors or three factors. One is your birth rate, that if in a particular region more and more children are born, the population is going to increase. So birth rate contributes directly or is related directly proportionally to increase in population. When it comes to death rate, you find if more the number of people who die, there'll be a decrease in population. So death rate is inversely related to increase in population, because if there is a high death rate, that means more and more number of people in that particular area are dying, thereby having a negative impact on population growth. And the third factor can be migration, because if people from a certain regions keep migrating to this area in huge numbers, it is going to increase the population in this area. So to increase this population, there can be three factors which are responsible. One is birth rate, second one is death rate, and third one is migration. So I hope you know these three. Now another idea is that of fertility rate. It is related to birth rate. So the birth rate is a direct function of fertility rate. What does that mean? So first you have to understand the definition of fertility rate. Fertility rate is basically the number of children which are born to a female, which are born to a lady, which are born to a woman in her reproductive life cycle. In her reproductive life cycle. So the basic, generally it is considered to be, say, 19 to 49 roughly. You not have to worry about the numbers, where some might say it is 15 to 49, because post 15 they can say give birth. So the basic idea is, in the reproductive age, on an average, what is the number of children that a particular woman is giving birth to? So when we look at the fertility rate of an entire region, you'll find it is basically the average, the mean of all the women in that reproductive age and the number of children that they are giving birth to. This is basically what fertility rate is. Now, fertility rate as suggested by Jayant is 2.1 currently. The data is coming from NFHS 5, and we are going to take a fertility rate separately. But now we have to understand that birth rate is directly dependent on fertility rate. If the fertility rate is high, the birth rate is going to be higher. Why? Because if more number of children are born on an average, that means the birth rate is going to be higher. As simple as that. They have a very direct relationship, and rather, fertility rate is a function of birth rate. Now, we have to see, if we want to control population, what we have to do is we have to take care of migration. One. Second, we have to take care of our birth and fertility rate, because you cannot deal with death rate. You cannot say, because, and please remember, even though death rate is a direct factor of increase in population, you are not supposed to say, and it is not ethically right, that you say that, okay, let's increase the death rate, which is ethically incorrect, which is ethically a disaster, morally a disaster. So you cannot say that. So we are not going to touch death rate, but we are going to play with migration as a factor, and birth rate and fertility rate. And when it comes to population growth, say of India, migration would not play a major role. Why? Because we find that it is generally outward migration from India of people. Inward migration is not huge. And if you consider the migration between various states, the overall population of this country remains the same. People might migrate from, say, Karnataka to Kerala, but it is not going to change the overall population of this region. Yes, there can be problems like urbanization, etc. The challenges related to urbanization, but the overall population of this country is not going to change because of internal migration. When it comes to external migration, we see that it is not major, and rather it is more number of people are migrating outside the country. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to specifically target fertility rate and birth rate to control population growth. Now again, you find that about controlling the population growth, two questions have already been asked. So they were saying that women empowerment can be a direct factor which can contribute to uh, putting a bar on population growth, which can stop this growth in population. One. Similarly, they were saying that poverty directly contributes to population growth. That means this fertility rate ultimately is going to have multiple factors. That there can be multiple factors which impact fertility rate. And if we look at these factors, we can find our answer. Because ultimately it is fertility rate which is directly contributing to population growth. So if you understand the factors which lead to an increase in fertility rate or the factors which impact fertility rate, we can simply think of them as factors which lead to population growth. So I hope the idea is clear. So what we are saying, fertility rate directly contributes to an increase in population. And if you look at the factors affecting fertility rate, we can basically understand them as factors affecting population growth. And those two questions which have been asked are coming from this idea. Because women empowerment as a direct factor of fertility rate. Women empowerment will affect fertility rate and hence will affect population growth. Similarly, poverty impacts population growth, or poverty impacts fertility rate and hence it impacts population growth. So two questions have already been asked on two of the factors. They can ask a question on any other factor as well. So it is better to understand this conceptually. Now, if we start looking into various factors of fertility rate, I'm sure that we would not be able to conclude this in next 5 minutes, because in another 5 minutes you have your lunch break for 40 minutes. So the plan of the classes, we had this class from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. Now the second session will start at 3:40 p.m. and will go on till 5:40 p.m. Right? And the third session then from 5:40 to 6 we'll have a break, and the third session will go on from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. This is the schedule of our class today. Now we have only 5 minutes left. So rather than starting with fertility rate, I would just want you to remember things till here. What we'll do is I'll take up your questions and conclude this session, and then we'll meet again at 3:40. So one question is, how would the prelims question come? So first thing is that these two subjects, social issues and justice, fall in paper 1 and paper 2 of your mains paper. So these are subjects which will find from where you'll find questions in mains paper. But also it is not limited to mains paper, because when it comes to social justice, when it comes to say your smart city program that you have read with urbanization, similarly when it comes to say mission Indradhanush, which comes with health, all these questions can be asked directly on these schemes, etc., in prelims as well. Similarly, you find questions on in the various indices of poverty in prelims. So yes, a lot of things that we are going to discuss here will be related to prelims, but we are not going to study this from a prelims point of view, because ultimately in prelims, if at all a question is being found from social issues and justice, and to be honest, the question will be from social justice rather than social issues. They're not going to ask you a conceptual question from social issues. They are going to ask you a question more of a factual nature from various schemes and government interventions. They can ask you a question based on civil society in prelims, but that question will have a very dynamic nature. They'll come directly from your current affairs. So rather than thinking of this subject as something meant for prelims, just think of it as a subject meant specifically for mains, and the questions from this subject that find a mention in prelims examination come directly from current affairs. So a current affairs will take care of the prelims part, and here in a classroom we are going to take up your mains part. I hope this is clear. Any other question or doubt that you have? Any other question that you have? Absolutely yes. So that means concepts for mains and current affairs as facts in prelims. So yes, I'm not saying that they'll ask a hardcore factual question in prelims. Yes, they can make it a little conceptual, but ultimately it'll be based on that government intervention, various indices like global hunger index, multidimensional poverty index, etc. in your prelims paper. They can ask a question directly on national education policy in prelims, then ask a question on something on a component of health policy in prelims. But again, it'll come directly from your current affairs. It would not be a part of the static subject. Okay, so let's do one thing. Let's wind up this session here. In the next session, which will start at 3:40, and please join by 3:40. In the next session, we'll take up various factors which impact fertility rate and ultimately population growth. And then we'll jump directly into issues related to population. So let's conclude this session and see you at 3:40 after the lunch break. Thank you, everyone.